I got involved in Bitcoin in early 2011. So I discovered Bitcoin when I was reading Hacker News and I saw an article about Bitcoin. I know the day was May 13, 2011 because I set aside the next day, May 14, 2011, to be my day of Bitcoin, where I would spend the entire day researching Bitcoin because I thought that if the promise of this technology was true, it would be one of the most remarkable innovations in history, and I wanted to be a part of it. Now, a lot has happened between then and now, and I want to talk a bit about sort of lessons that I've learned as it pertains to Bitcoin, and as it pertains to the price. So way back then, I was over a 3-week period of time. I decided I basically obsessively researched it. I kind of ditched physics for 3 weeks and spent just about all of my time studying Bitcoin. I became increasingly convinced that Satoshi Nakamoto had basically nailed the protocol. And you can and should go back in and read the original writings of Satoshi Nakamoto. You can find his original writings from both the mailing list and the Bitcoin Talk forum, not just the white paper. Read the other stuff too, and you get a sort of an accurate idea for what the original vision for Bitcoin was. So I thought that what would happen is, okay, first of all, I'm going to buy some because I think the price is probably going to go up. So that much was true. The price did go up, and that was a good investment, at least in the sense of the price going up. What I also thought was going to happen was the incentives were so well aligned that people would basically add this into existing businesses and create businesses around it. This was partially true, but what happened in detail was very, very different than what I thought. And so the primary differences were what I never conceived of was that, well, I shouldn't say never conceived of. What I thought was unlikely was that there would be people that wanted to strictly limit the maximum block size. I thought it was unlikely but possible because even back then in 2011, we all knew that one of the protocol rules was the maximum block size. And by then, Satoshi had stopped communicating with the community. And there's sort of no leadership. So it wasn't clear whether that was possible, whether that could actually happen, that we could actually remove the maximum block size limit and restore the original protocol. So I thought it was unlikely that there would be people that would actually want to keep it in place. I thought it would be very clear what the correct sort of thing to do moving forward would be. And by the way, I want to give a sort of a shout out to Daniel Kraywitz, who I think thinks very similar to myself. And I don't mean to speak for him, but he has certainly said things along these lines of basically, well, I won't speak for him. I'll just say, consume, Daniel Kraywitz's content. Check out his YouTube page and the articles he's written and stuff like this. But I'll speak for myself when I say this, and say something like, it seems as though people did not completely understand what to do, and they ended up doing the wrong things. And I think I had a slightly better idea about what to do, but I certainly didn't want to claim to be correct about it or anything like this. I certainly made plenty of my own errors. Okay, so let me just change course slightly here, because I'm going to talk about something that people are going to think is a little bit weird, but it's extremely relevant. So this morning I watched Pinocchio, the movie from I forget what year. It's like the 1930s or something like this. Actually, let me look it up right now as we're talking. I don't want to get the date wrong. So Pinocchio, Disney movie, Wikipedia. When was this published? Okay, so it was published in 1940. Okay, so 1930s wasn't too far off. So this movie was published in 1940, and the reason why I watched Pinocchio this morning was because I was actually watching the latest Maps of Meaning course from Jordan Peterson from early 2017. And he spends the first several lectures basically explaining the let's say the mythology of Pinocchio. So he's basically interpreting Pinocchio through the lens of someone who understands religion and psychology, and is pointing out that the story of Pinocchio basically has sort of a story arc and sort of these mythical details that are practically the same thing as religious mythology. So what happens in Pinocchio is this guy Geppetto makes a puppet, Pinocchio, that you have to be pulled by strings. Very, the whole movie is incredibly symbolic about everything that happens. I mean, it's basically a moral lesson for children. That is, it gets this sort of mythology sort of accurate. Like, it's very, very correct in the sense of, well, it's very much how life is, if you interpret it correctly, metaphorically. So anyway, Geppetto makes, Pinocchio, and then as he's going to sleep, he wishes upon a star that Pinocchio could become a real boy. And what ends up happening is the fairy godmother comes out of the star. She is a star, and she comes down, and she decides that Geppetto was a good person for bringing happiness to people, and she's going to help make Pinocchio into a real boy. And so she sort of turns, she sort of animates Pinocchio, and Pinocchio becomes a real boy, but not quite a real boy. He's actually still a puppet. He looks like a puppet, but now he can move around and he can talk and stuff. And what ends up happening is Geppetto wakes up, and they decide that Pinocchio needs to go to school the next day. And along the way, there's a cricket named Jiminy Cricket who the fairy godmother decides that Jiminy Cricket is the conscience of Pinocchio. And so Jiminy Cricket is responsible for telling Pinocchio what's right and what's wrong. And of course, Jiminy Cricket right away, like he has this really funny sort of stumbling speech where he tells Pinocchio the difference between right and wrong, but it's absolute nonsense. And so it's really funny because Pinocchio does not actually know the difference between right and wrong. And his conscience is telling him stuff, but it makes no sense. And so Pinocchio goes out there and goes to school. And while he's going to school, he encounters a fox, and I forget the other creature. It's like two foxes or something like this, who pitch him on this idea of becoming a star in like a theater. And so they're pitching him on this lifestyle of what it's like to be an actor in a theater. And so they take him over to this. They basically convince him to go with them to become a star. And so what ends up happening is the guy that like runs the place is like a lunatic, and ends up sort of locking him in like a little jail. And so the lesson here is something like, well, Pinocchio was won over by this idea, but he sort of has no idea, what's going on really, because his conscience tried to explain to him what was going on and sort of failed. But his conscience along the way, Jiminy Cricket, does sort of try to explain to him there's something wrong here, but Pinocchio goes anyway. Then something interesting happens, which is he manages to escape all this. But along the way, something else interesting happens. It's incredibly symbolic and metaphorical. I'm going to attach this to crypto and explain the significance of this for crypto. So he ends up going like basically there's the guy that runs the theater wants to get a bunch of boys and basically enslave them. So he turns he has them play around and commit a bunch of crimes, and then he turns them all into jackasses. So all of the little boys turn into jackasses, and by jackass we mean a donkey. And the movie uses both donkeys and like the word jackass is actually used. So Pinocchio is there with one of the other boys who just turns into a jackass in front of his eyes. And they're sitting there doing things like smoking cigars, playing pool, and talking about how life is wonderful, their life of being jackasses, basically. So the other boy turns into a complete jackass, and I really mean a complete one. And they show you the metamorphosis from from zero jackass to partial jackass to a complete jackass. So the other boy turns into a complete jackass, and all the jackasses are basically shipped off to become slaves somewhere. Pinocchio becomes a halfway jackass, and with the help of Jiminy Cricket, like escapes. And so he's actually able to escape and go to, he then encounters the fairy godmother again and tries to explain to the fairy godmother. I forget exactly the sequence of events, but it's something like this. And the fairy godmother is like asking, I think the fairy godmother is going to help him escape, if I remember correctly. So the fairy godmother is asking him what happens, and Pinocchio starts to lie about what happened. He said, I was captured by two monsters, which is not really what happened. And he sort of keeps lying about what happened to the fairy godmother. So as he's lying, his nose grows. So he's just digging himself in deeper and deeper and deeper. The more he lies about what actually happened, the more his nose gets longer and longer and longer. And it's just obvious to everyone that he's lying about these things. So anyway, the fairy godmother basically realizes, well, you were born yesterday, literally. You clearly have no idea, the difference here. I'm going to forgive you. So I forgive you, and I turn your nose back into a normal-sized nose and help you escape from these people. But meanwhile, what ends up happening is, so he's been forgiven, which is very interesting. He's like so innocent, you can't help but forgive this little, puppet. So then it turns out his father Geppetto is out there looking for him, and Geppetto ends up on the ocean and ends up actually being swallowed by a whale and going down, inside the whale, and has survived inside of a ship, like at the bottom of the ocean inside of a whale. And so as Pinocchio and his conscience get a letter that tell him what happened to his father has been swallowed by a whale and is at the bottom of the ocean. So at this point, Pinocchio is still like a half jackass. Okay, so he actually has ears like a donkey, and so he's like a partial jackass. But what the fairy godmother tells him is that, basically, I forget sort of when this happened in the movie, but the sequence is slightly beside the point. The fairy godmother says something like, Pinocchio, you can be a real boy if you are brave, truthful, and unselfish. So what follows is the process of Pinocchio learning to become brave, truthful, and unselfish. So he has to go rescue his father from the belly of the whale at the bottom of the ocean. So he has to be brave, which he goes and does this. He stops lying, so he's being truthful about things. And unselfish in the sense that he's risking his own life to go save his father from the belly of the whale. Now, as I'm telling this story, I mean, like, if you haven't ever seen Pinocchio, you probably have because it's a very popular movie, but all of these things that are going on are incredibly reminiscent of religious mythology. So it's like the same types of things that go on in Pinocchio are the things that happen in religious mysticism and religious mythology. Okay, so anyway, what ends up happening is he goes down there. Pinocchio figures out they need to start a fire in the belly of the whale to make the whale sneeze and sneeze them out, because the whale, only opens its mouth. The only way to escape is when it's eating, but they don't know when it's going to eat. But they can make it sneeze and sneeze them out. So they actually do this. They start a fire and the whale sneezes and they escape and they survive. And what ends up happening is Pinocchio. So they sort of go back, and the fairy godmother turns Pinocchio into a real boy. Okay, so at the end of the story, Pinocchio goes from being a puppet that's sort of animated to becoming a real boy. So what I want to talk about is some of the symbolism and how this relates actually to the cryptocurrency industry. So what I think we're in is, I can see in my own life, and I'll link to the video that I created about my religious experience earlier this year. I'm someone who takes religion seriously. I don't consider myself someone with any particular religious beliefs, but I do take these stories seriously, because what I now realized that my eyes have been open to this year that I wasn't open to previously was that these religious mythologies do tell us something about human morality. That part of the reason why these stories have been around for so long, and they're so weird and they're so extreme, but they tell us accurate truths about human morality. And I can now see later in life things that I didn't see when I was younger, that I had to live through this and witness with my own eyes stories that were metaphorically similar to religious mythology. Okay, so I've seen these things happen in my own life, and I've seen it happen in the cryptocurrency industry as well as other areas. But I'm going to explain how this has happened in the cryptocurrency industry. So I can remember in 2017 what happened is, the same way that Pinocchio was won over to be like a theater star, a lot of people in the cryptocurrency industry were won over by near-term gains that we're all going to get rich by pumping a coin. Okay. And so a lot of people, really frankly, I'm pretty sure a majority of people, were won over by absurd ideas about how they were going to get rich. And they thought they're all going to get rich soon, and that morality doesn't matter, that we don't need to do things like create real businesses and all this stuff. We don't need to actually create value for our customers. We just need to buy the right coin, hype it up, and other people are going to do all the work, and they're going to make us rich. And so a giant fraction, really it's probably almost the entire cryptocurrency industry, basically adopted this incredibly short-sighted perspective, just like Pinocchio going to join the theater thinking it's all cool and stuff because they're singing a song and happy about it, when completely ignoring the reality of what's actually going on. So most people were sort of won over by this, including myself. I was partially won over, but I never went all in and never did things like actually scam people with a cryptocurrency. Fortunately, I never did anything like this. I was sort of naive is what I was. I was sort of won over by the sort of hype of the situation to get sort of excited about these things. And I could see I was a halfway jackass, just like Pinocchio, because I would go on Twitter hyping up Bitcoin, okay? But I wasn't really doing things correctly. I wasn't really creating value for users. I was one of these people hyping up Bitcoin on Twitter back in, let's say, before 2017, because by 2017 things started to change. And I could detect that that's around the period when I'm like lying about what's going on, and my nose is growing, and I'm starting to realize what's going on, and the fairy godmother's giving me a chance to escape from prison. And I'm starting to realize I ought to take this chance and stop lying about things. And basically this means sort of bringing a bit of reality to it. And it took me a while because I would say I'm still learning. I don't claim to be perfectly moral or anything like this. But at least I sort of have learned to look at things through this moral lens and can see mistakes I've made in trying to correct myself. So I'm still probably a partial jackass. I don't think I'm a real boy yet. I've got donkey ears just like Pinocchio did. But what happened to some of these other people is they became full-on jackasses. They full-on donkeys. They completely converted into a jackass and have been shipped off to prison. And I'm talking about people like the people with the hodl mentality. So this idea that what they're going to do is they're just going to hodl sats and wait for other people to do all the work to actually make real businesses that create value for people and give people a reason to use this stuff. I believe that they are, and I'm using the word jackass because this is in the movie. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just saying it strikes me that I think that mentality is exactly like that. They've actually converted into, fully over into this immoral sort of prison where they're now locked by their own absurd, immoral beliefs about what they think is going to happen. They think they're just going to sit back and wait for everybody else to do all this work, and it's just going to happen. And meanwhile, same thing with it. It happens in BTC because I think these ideas in BTC don't make any sense. And I think the same thing that happens with, really, again, I'm not trying to be offensive when I say things. I'm trying to be as honest and frank as I can be. But I think most of these other cryptocurrencies do not make any sense at all. And so what has actually happened is these people are like locked into a lie. So in this case, they're both like the donkeys that have been fully converted over in this movie Pinocchio, as well as like when Pinocchio is lying and his nose just gets longer and longer and longer. It's like these people are jackasses, again, in the sense of the movie, where they've been sort of fully converted, like via metamorphosis into a jackass, and their noses are growing too. They continue to lie and dig themselves deeper into this situation. So I can see those moral lessons there, and then there are other lessons here too, like the idea that you have to save your father from the belly of the whale. What we have to do is we actually do have to prove ourselves to be brave, truthful, and unselfish. And I do not think that it's a coincidence that the movie uses these things. These are like very deep attributes of what it means to be a moral person, that we should have these elements. We should be brave. Brave means basically willing to put up with the suffering of life. Being willing to put up with all this crazy stuff that goes on, but toughing it out anyway, and doing the right thing in spite of how incredibly challenging and how incredibly risky and how you might die doing it, but you brave through these things and do it anyway. Telling the truth means exactly that, so that's why I'm going to continue as best I can. There's another lesson I learned from Jordan Peterson too, because he talks about this very explicitly. There are lessons from the Soviet Union, how this guy Shovinitsyn wrote accurately about what happened in the gulags and made a giant difference in ending the gulags of the Soviet Union by just telling the truth about what happened. There's tremendous power in telling the truth, okay? And so we can be brave and tell the truth. And this is a lesson that I've learned. I didn't learn this really so much directly from the movie Pinocchio, but have learned it in my life. This is exactly what I'm trying to do. Like, I'm willing to put up with the insane trolling to some extent. I'm off Twitter. But in any case, I know that I still get hated on and trolled by people. But so long as I'm convinced I'm right about these things, I'm going to keep saying what I think is correct, always. And I have at least some degree of braveness to put up with at least that. And of course, I don't mean to compare myself to more brave people. I mean, certainly there are people out there that are extremely brave that have had to put up with a lot more than I have. But in any case, there is an element of braveness there that I'm trying to do. And so telling the truth and being brave go together. And then finally, being unselfish. This is one that's quite hard, but I also have talked about this one previously. So being unselfish, I see this as I created a video about, I think it was called Jesus, Trade, and Entropy, where I talked about some of these ideas. It's a good idea to actually completely dedicate yourself to helping other people. Because actually, by helping everyone else, you're actually incentivizing the world to help you. And so you don't actually necessarily know the way in which other people are going to help you back. You have faith in that, though. Okay, so this is my incredibly rational, scientific-based way I interpret what faith might mean, is this idea of actually having faith that other people are going to help you. And I think that's a perfectly valid way of looking at it. That this is what we do in economics. That in economics, we rely on other people to do their job to solve problems. And I just can't do everything. But I can do my job, and I can do it as best I can. And there is nothing I can do better than that. And I just trust, I have faith that by doing my job as best I can, that other people are going to solve other problems, and I can trade with them, and we're all going to win. I don't have to know everything, and I don't have to do everything these other people are doing. I have faith that they're going to work it out somehow. Now, it might not work out, but what am I going to do? I mean, the best stance is that anyway. It is in doing what I do best, and then having faith that other people are going to do their job. Okay, so let's see. We can rope this back into the cryptocurrency industry and say things like, so first of all, I think a key lesson from all this stuff is, I think we're still in like, if you had to like capture the cryptocurrency industry in a nutshell right now, The cryptocurrency industry in a nutshell is Pinocchio locked in prison, and he's currently lying to the fairy godmother, and his nose is getting longer and longer and longer. And what we have the opportunity to do is to escape from prison and stop lying to the fairy godmother. And there's an interesting lesson here in that the fairy godmother will actually instantly forgive you and let you go and give you another chance if you just stop lying about things. So, for instance, a lesson here would be something like, are you working on a cryptocurrency that has no hope? Are you working on something, and I won't name any names, but I certainly have some in mind, that there is no way that makes any sense at all? And what's going on is you've got people that continue to lie about them, to continue to con people into believing things that make no sense. They are lying to the fairy godmother, and their noses are getting longer and longer and longer with each passing day. So we basically can exit this, okay? And so what we can do is as individuals, be the Pinocchio that stops lying to the fairy godmother, gets a second chance, and then rescues his father from the belly of the whale, okay? You still have a chance. Okay, so moving on here. So enough of this not lying. What I think we can do moving forward is how to do this accurately. Well, first of all, again, I think the moral lessons are brave, truthful, and unselfish. I mean, what more can I say about these things? If you're not already convinced that it's a good idea to be a moral person, well, reconsider this. Go watch Pinocchio and watch it 10 times if you need to, and watch Jordan Peterson. And I think over time, and for that matter, go consume religious material and talk to a pastor or talk to a psychologist, or study neuroscience yourself. I think the more you learn and the more you act in the world, as well as just do things, experience things, you'll realize being a moral person is a good thing. You don't necessarily have to know what the implications of your actions are. It's the same idea. If you help people, they will gradually learn that you're someone that they want to help, and they will help you back again. Okay? And God will instantly forgive you. The fairy godmother will instantly forgive you if you simply immediately begin acting in this way. You begin acting as a moral person right now, you are instantly forgiven. And this has nothing to do with whether you believe that God exists as a man in the sky or something like this, or whether the fairy godmother literally is a star that came down to earth and blessed Pinocchio or something like this. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the idea that the best thing you can do right now is to start acting morally right now. You can't repair everything instantly, but you can stop lying right now. You can be brave right now. You can be unselfish right now, and things will start to fix. It's like if you're someone who smokes, you can start to cure your lung cancer right now by just stop smoking. Just cut out those bad habits, start acting correctly, and things will start to repair themselves. The repair process will take a while, but at least you're set off on the right path now. Okay? So what we do in crypto is, stop lying to people about the success of these cryptocurrencies. Instead, what we do is build real businesses. So if you really want to be successful in the cryptocurrency world, well, it's like anything else. You can't violate these basic lessons of economics. Okay, the reason why so many people got wealthy in the cryptocurrency industry is because what actually happened was not that they solved real problems in the real world. What actually happened was they promised amateur investors the world and basically sold them all on a lie. And that's where a lot of these people got their money from, is amateur investors losing out to people who were either willful scammers or they're like, halfway jackasses who have been halfway converted into being a jackass and have basically just lied to people and scammed them out of their money. And what you need to do is, rectify the situation. So I don't have any particular, I'm not going to try and explain how to do this other than to say that this is what, people like that need to do. Where to say with this? Okay, so in conclusion, I think the lesson is something like, don't be like one of these people that wants to hodl a coin and sit back and wait for other people to do all the work. I think the best way to act is to actually do things that are valuable and trade with people. And you should do this, this is moral when you do it this way. You create something new, right? If you're just waiting you think that you're just in early as somehow that's a good thing. I mean, actually help us create businesses. Actually help us solve real problems that solve real problems for real people. And what you do is, that it's working if you're able to profit from doing so. You know that you're really succeeding if you're creating something so valuable that your effort plus the raw materials that go into this thing results in people pay you more money than it costs, and you actually profit from doing this. This is a signal that you're doing the right thing. You're solving a real problem because people are willing to pay you for it. Profit is moral in this respect. So look at people like Andrew Carnegie and Adam Smith who talk about these ideas. Okay? And Craig Wright. Okay? Look at what Craig's doing, because Craig conveys the same ideas in a way that turns people off, but the ideas are extremely good that he's saying. Okay, so create real businesses. This means ultimately something that's profitable. What you can do is, I think one of the lessons from Silicon Valley is like, you don't strictly speaking have to profit, but you do need to grow continuously. So you do need to be like earning more money and having enough money come in to allow you to continue to grow. And I believe the level of growth can continue for a very long time. Growth is predominantly based on information, not based on energy or something like this. We don't need more energy. What we need to do is we need to better organize the world. Again, this is another thing I talked about in my video on the universe trends towards order. We actually emerged from chaos in the early universe because the early universe was actually in thermal equilibrium. Thanks to the expansion of the universe is actually expanding so quickly that it actually outgrows the growth of entropy of the universe as a whole, so that the entropy density is actually declining. So the universe is actually on our side, increasing order. This is the opposite of what many people think, but watch the video I created and look at the other articles and stuff like this, and just do your own research on this stuff, because what I'm saying is should not be controversial. It's just correct. The entropy density of the universe is declining. So anyway, what you can do is you can create order. So we want to create, like accurate order. And from an economic perspective, what we're doing is we're creating profitable businesses. So simply create value for people, and that's it. And you'll find that you want to act in a moral way because you want people on your side. You don't want to create enemies of these people. If you try and take away from other people, you're turning them into an enemy. So these people in the rest of the cryptocurrency industry, what they've effectively done is they have latent enemies. They have enemies that are going to show up later on because they've screwed these people. And the world has not yet understood what has happened. But if you're one of those people that has either intentionally or unintentionally screwed people, well, the sooner you figure this out and you're honest with yourself and you're Pinocchio and you stop lying to the fairy godmother, the sooner you can escape from this whole thing and not become a full-on jackass. You can cure yourself and become a real boy in the future. Okay, so anyway, in a nutshell, lesson is create real businesses. Don't hodl a coin, wait for other people to do all the work, and stop lying. And we should be brave, truthful, and unselfish. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.